Greetings, everyone, and welcome back for our March team training for teams who are in their first year of the PBIS Academy. I'm Eric Mackey.
And I'm Christine Downs.
And we are trainers for NEPBIS. This presentation was developed with the support of NEPBIS. So for today's training, we are going to review our acknowledgement systems and what you've been building. And we'll also be going over the getting started step of number 7, building a continuum for correcting problem behavior. Your tasks during this training are to draft your behavior definitions, such as your major behaviors and your minor behaviors. You're also going to be drafting your discipline responses, such as via a flow chart or a ladder. And you'll also be reviewing and modifying your office discipline referral form. And we'll be going over what those things can look like. Here are some excellent additional reading and resources that you can access within the syllabus at nepbis.org. The Responding to Minor Behaviors example sheet is from Missouri PBIS. It provides descriptions of techniques teachers can use to manage and respond to inappropriate behavior, such as using proximity and redirecting back to task. Along those lines, the Continuum of Responses to Inappropriate Behaviors from Midwest PBIS also provides strategies teachers can use, but it also provides a self and observational assessment tool that can be used to assess teachers' use of strategies. The Putting a Definition Back in Defiance document from PBIS apps challenges us to define defiance in observable, measurable, and specific terms to reduce disproportionality in discipline. It also provides suggestions for responding to defiance in the moment and preventing defiant behavior. Finally, keep in mind that there are a lot of excellent mini modules to be found on the nepbis.org website, including one on major versus minor behaviors, which we're going to be discussing in this session. So first, let's quickly review what we covered about acknowledgement systems. In our last session, we spent some time discussing how to create a continuum of ways to acknowledge our students, as well as staff, for following the expectations and routines, and for trying on new skills. What ideas have you come up with so far? There are some helpful resources online to get you started, but we always advocate for asking the students and faculty what they want to earn. Many schools use surveys or discussions with students, with their leadership communities to gather such information. Please know that this isn't a one and done effort. Acknowledgement systems should be ongoing, varied, and desirable. So you may need to re-survey your students and teachers every few months to a year or so. This helps to keep your acknowledgement systems fresh and interesting. Please do keep in mind that the adults need acknowledgement too. Staff acknowledgement systems can be helpful in boosting morale and encouraging staff to try new PBIS-related skills. Like the students, be sure to ask them what they'd like to, or rather ask them how they'd like to be acknowledged. If your team hasn't done so yet, spend some time developing a grid of your current acknowledgement systems. Do you have high frequency acknowledgements, such as things like gotcha tickets, shout outs, or verbal praise when students display expected behaviors? Make sure that's in there. How about monthly celebrations of students or grade level celebrations? And don't forget to schedule school-wide celebrations like pep rallies to help create community and promote a positive culture.
Okay, so now we will move on to step 7 and review creating a continuum for correcting problem behaviors. If you haven't already, teams should take some time to watch the major versus minor mini module that Eric referred to previously. It provides an introduction to developing a continuum for correcting problem behaviors and reviews that first step, which is clearly defining behaviors. You can find that on nepbis.org. Go to the Tier 1 school-wide menu and choose PBIS PBIS Academy Virtual Training to see the full list of mini modules. So there are a few critical features to a continuum of consequences. First, what is the function of the behavior? This is the why student does the behavior. What is it that he or she wants to get or wants to avoid? So if a student is tardy to class, it might be to get time with their peers, or it might be to get out of, to escape a class that maybe they're not prepared for. Next, your continuum should align with the school-wide expectation matrix and your rules. And remember, it exists as only one component of a larger system of behavior change for the students. Remember, it's way more effective and efficient to be proactive and prevent problem behaviors by explicitly teaching expectations or new skills. Responding to problem behavior is, of course, necessary, but that alone will rarely change behavior in the future. And finally, a system of support, such as your PBIS team, reviews current teaching and monitoring of current responses to misbehavior through data collection and analysis. So we're going to walk through three important components to developing a hierarchy of responses to behavior. Clear definitions for understanding behavior, a discipline flow chart to ensure consistent responses from your staff, and discipline referral forms to track and analyze the occurrence of problem behaviors. First, we're going to focus on clearly defining the unexpected or undesirable behaviors. We want to provide full, objective, and measurable definitions so that everyone in the building could identify the behavior accurately if they saw it. Once they're defined, we want to classify the behaviors as being either minor behaviors, those that a teacher might take care of in their classroom, or major behaviors, those behaviors that an administrator might take care of. The minor behaviors tend to be lower in intensity, usually less disruptive, but possibly more frequent. So, major behaviors, we know they tend to be higher in intensity and hopefully less frequent. I said that. Such classifications help us to delineate whose responsibility it is to respond to a behavior. But remember, it's not enough to know that you are responsible for responding to that behavior, but how do I do that? And that comes into the flow chart. So it's especially important to clearly define subjective problem behaviors, such as disrespect or disruption, right? The label disruption is really popular, right? Everyone uses it, but it can cover a lot of ground. Both tapping a pencil and basically flipping a desk could be considered disruptive. But should they elicit the same response from the adults? Hopefully you're saying no, right? They're different in their intensity, and the responses should also be tailored to their level of intensity, as you can see here. So it's helpful to break down broad terms like disruption or disrespect and have a conversation about those terms, what they actually look like, and then break those descriptions down into major versus minor behaviors. So here you can see disruption, what it looks like, class managed or minor, basically refusal to do work, calling out, tapping pencils, talking to someone else, right? Lower intensity, probably higher frequency, but a teacher addresses those behaviors. Office managed disruption looks like escalated disruption, maybe even into physical or verbal confrontations, right? Or repeated minor behaviors to the point where the learning environment is disruptive. So this makes it very clear to staff what the behavior looks like and how to respond. So your efforts can help to reduce the chance of us providing overly restrictive consequences to students due to an overly broad behavioral category. Right? People know that a simple tapping on a pencil does not need office managed responses. Okay, so let's just pause for a moment and address a key issue. You undoubtedly will have staff that say the punitive consequences for student misbehavior are not strong enough or severe enough. We just need to be stronger in our discipline. However, what staff really need to understand is that punishment without any positive, proactive, and most importantly, instructional approach, it will not lead to change in behavior. It does not teach any skill in and of itself, right? And in fact, it can often result in increased aggression, vandalism, truancy, and even dropping out of school. So we must treat behavioral errors the same way we treat academic errors, with increased and often individualized instruction. Removing a student from your class will not improve their behavior, and they will most likely fall further behind academically and become more frustrated, and that often leads to even more problem behaviors. It's all in the teaching of new skills. So let's get back to defining those behaviors. Here is an example. It's a nice culturally responsive pie chart that can be found in the culturally responsive field guide. It breaks down behavior into what we talked about before: staff managed problem behaviors, those minors, office managed or major behaviors, and then situationally inappropriate behaviors. So situationally inappropriate behaviors are behaviors that may or may not be appropriate in class or in the school setting. So something like talking to your peers might be appropriate when you're asking what page the class is on, or requesting a peer send back the papers that the teacher is handing out. However, it is probably inappropriate to talk during a test or during a teacher lecture. So consider how a student might feel getting corrected for a behavior that was necessary. And so I was talking right before a test, but I wanted the peer in front of me to hand back the test. When we discuss the flow chart, you might even add a step for staff to verify these situational behaviors before correcting or consequencing a student. When teaching students the expectations for school, we will need to explicitly teach the school appropriate skills. But with that said, we should annually review our behavioral expectations and our matrix to ensure they reflect the culture and the values of both our staff and, very importantly, our student and family communities. So watch this simulation of an activity that you can do with your staff, right? Have them come together and discuss as a whole group, or sometimes it's more effective if you break into smaller teams, where the different behaviors fit on the chart and why. And you can certainly add any behaviors that your school is struggling with or confronting frequently, add those behaviors to this. And then next, follow up with the whole staff, have a discussion to see where everybody put different things and help them understand why the different behaviors go into the different categories and how we're going to teach students to know the difference. Remember, if your paraeducators are not part of your standard staff meetings, you'll definitely need to find a time to review this with them and your other systems with them as well. PBIS will not be effective if there's a large portion of your staff that are not properly trained. So for each problem behavior, your team should create a clear definition so that there's clear staff consistency. And if you can include examples, it's even more effective in classifying the behaviors. So you can see here something like physical contact. Sometimes physical aggression and physical contact get all blurred together, but here they're very clear about the definition. It's when a student engages in a non-serious but inappropriate physical contact. So that might look like pushing, pulling, accidental hitting, horseplay, things like that. And that can help differentiate between something that's more aggressive and violent. Here's another example, breaking down what behavior might look like depending on severity level. So you see across the top, the team has categorized behaviors as either just needing a warning or a reteach, a minor offense that teacher would handle, or a major offense for the administrator. And each of the terms of what each thing means is right there. It's clearly defined. And this is really helpful to teams when they're trying to sort out the different behaviors, which one belongs in which category. And it helps the reader. to understand how each behavior was categorized in the first place. Right? So from here, then we have each behavior, and this just shows 2 on this example, but how it looks at each severity level. So making it clear that like an offensive remark here, right? That's maybe it's just reteaching, a warning, right? And that's going to be handled differently than swearing used to harass or intimidate. And I really appreciate how this document also includes the desirable or expected behaviors over here. So it connects them all really nicely. And this can really guide a staff towards reminding them or redirecting or reteaching the expected behavior because it's right there. All right, the next component we're going to talk about is the discipline flowchart for responding to those major and minor behaviors. All right, you may already have a discipline flowchart in place. It's generally a document that's very visual. It's got a process for responding to the behavior and how we track those behavioral incidences. It's supposed to be a real quick reference guide for staff and students. Put it in their planner or handbook. And it includes how behaviors are managed in the classroom and by administration. Ideally, it also provides guidance as to what information is also tracked on your discipline, your office discipline form, but we'll get to that in just a moment. All right, so here's our first of several examples we're going to show you. This is a flow chart, and it might be a little hard to read. We do have these examples for you, but in the top left corner over here, it says start here. And it highlights that the teacher should be using proactive strategies first to prevent any undesirable behavior. And it talks about instruction and specific praise and prompts, all the good stuff that we know should be happening in classrooms. Then we move to the triangle in the center, and that says inappropriate behavior. So this is when inappropriate behaviors happen. If it is a major problem behavior, they would follow off to the right. And if it's a minor behavior, they would follow right directly down below. So let's follow the minor behavior first. First, it goes to suggesting some simple strategies a teacher might use to address behavior, right? Like planned ignoring, moving closer, using proximity to the student, some redirection, maybe some reteaching. And if that doesn't work, we continue down the continuum, talks about a few more strategies, and then lets you know that after a certain amount of time that we would fill out a minor referral form. The school has a minor one as well. And we would document that and continue down until the behavior improves. If it improves at any stage, we go back up to just using our proactive strategies. So now if we look at the office managed or the major behaviors, that's this section to the right. And that goes down the process for sending the student to the office, completing the office referral form, and then the things that the administrator will do to respond to the behavior. This is a good one, and it's all on one page, nice and concise. So here's another one from a Massachusetts high school. This is pretty similar, but in the middle, it actually has the list of the teacher and the administrator different behaviors. It doesn't have the definition, but it has the list of behaviors there for that quick reference. Right? And this one actually also has a little thing at the bottom that says gray area, because there might be some behaviors that aren't very clear that are inappropriate. Maybe it's some kind of inconsolable crying or some kind of withdrawal that you might want to refer to an adjustment counselor, or maybe just ask administration, where should I send this? Because it will take time to have all of this to become a habit. So all of your flowcharts should have that teaching response sort of right at the beginning, right? Ideally referring to that right away to reinforce what they've already learned. That's your kind of your first component. And then we move down just like in the other ones with strategies and how to respond. The administrative assigned portion should also have some kind of follow-up component to ensure that students have that socially acceptable strategy for when that situation will arise again in the future. They need a new way of responding, Remember, consequences or punishment is not going to change the behavior in and of itself. One more flow chart here. This one we really like because it provides teacher with like a guide for a conversation with students around problem solving. This is, Eric, I noticed you don't have your homework with you. What should you be doing now? What are we working on? Right, we're going over our homework. Right. Can you get yours out? Do you need any help? Do you need another copy of the blank homework? Right. Okay, can you show me that you're with the rest of the class? Great, super, thanks for getting yourself together and getting ready to work, right? And then, next time, could you follow up when it's time for us to review that? So it kind of just gives them a nice guide that they can use in their own words to have that conversation with students. And you keep it pretty consistent so that it really becomes a habit. Here's a different kind of system. This is a level system, and some schools use this instead of a flow chart or alongside a flow chart. And here, the behaviors are organized by severity of the problem behavior and severity of the consequences along the bottom. And you can see they become progressively more undesirable behavior and progressively more intense responses. So you could probably consider level 1 and 2 behaviors to be sort of those minor behaviors teacher managed for most of them. And with level 3 and 4 being administratively handled. And again, this provides a nice resource for teachers to pull some consequences from. Remember, consequences are just what happens after the behavior. So even something like proximity, right, a student conference, those are types of consequences that hopefully can end the behavior right then and there. You should also have a continuum of consequences and a system of progressive discipline. That's really essential in creating a consistent discipline problem. So think about it, a student whose first time doing a behavior might get a warning, might get a conference with the principal, but if it's your third, fourth, fifth time of doing that same behavior, you might get a detention or an in-school suspension, right? Again, remember, ideally, we're also pairing that with an instructive approach, but that's the idea of progressive discipline. Of course, it's really important to have your administration be a part of that and to gain their consensus on the progressive discipline, because they're going to be the ones responding to those major behaviors, and they need to be a part of that. Okay, one more example. This is an interesting one. This comes from Pittsfield Public Schools, and they actually revised their entire code of conduct for the district. And they focused on creating a restorative and accountable community. So there's really a lot of wonderful things they put in here, but I'm just going to highlight how they have organized their problem behavior into 4 levels, sort of like we saw before, with increasing severity, right? And then their potential responses up here to different behaviors. And then they list all of their behaviors with a quick description, a definition, and then they indicate which level of behavior that it corresponds to. So again, you can do this at the district level, not just at the school level. All right, and if you're looking for more examples, you can grab the ones from this slide deck, or you could check out our exemplar repository on any PBIS. Again, it's under that tier 1 school-wide. You drop it down and you'll see exemplar repository. So ultimately, what we're looking for your teams to do is develop labels of the behaviors you see in your school, right? And then clearly define those behaviors, ideally with examples. Keep in mind, you ultimately want a finite list of behaviors without a lot of duplicates. So you want one category for something like abusive language, inappropriate language, and profanity, or one category for defiance, insubordination, noncompliance, because they all mean the same thing. And if you have 3 categories, it will dilute your data. It's really, we're looking at the same behavior. If you already have a list, awesome. But you might want to consider updating your list with behaviors that you are now seeing during online learning. Once you have the behaviors and they're labeled and defined, you want to identify the procedures for responding to those behaviors. Okay, so when you're next with your team, spend a little time identifying your problem behaviors, defining them, and developing your flow chart or your level system. In your flow chart, be sure you're going to include how you're going to track the behavior, so filling out an office referral form or something like that. If you don't have a tracking system yet, we'll talk more about that next month, or you can get Swiss through the Academy. Okay, so if your team isn't yet ready or at a place where you're able to discuss your responses to behaviors, maybe you're still establishing your expectations or values, writing your lessons, or creating your acknowledgement systems, go ahead and put this on your action plan to be addressed when your team is ready.
Your Office Discipline Referral Form, or ODR for short, is a paper or digital document that schools use to track problematic behavior. Tracking allows us to identify patterns of behavior ranging from school-wide to group or individual student behavior issues. In order to be able to problem solve with this data, we need to make sure that the form gathers the information that we need and that there's a clear process for completing the form. We want to create a documentation system that is quick, clear, and easy for the adults. Training, resource documents like flowcharts, and feedback help to make sure that the information we're gathering is accurate and usable. Before we go too far, we want to clarify what your office discipline referral is and what it isn't. It is documentation of interactions between students, staff, and administrators. It's also documentation of clear, discrete, and well-defined behaviors. It's a document which can only capture so much information, especially if you designed it to be completed efficiently. It's also a document that helps a team to make decisions regarding how to support individual students and groups of students, as well as teachers and staff. I also want to talk about what it's not. It's not your first step in addressing a behavior. Teachers need to be using proactive strategies like prompting the expectations, acknowledging desired behavior, proximity, hairy eyeball, etc., before thinking about filling out an office discipline form. Along those lines, an ODR is not punishment or correction in and of itself. There should be a separate response to the behavior by the teacher or administrator that conforms to your continuum of progressive discipline. Speaking of which, an office discipline referral is not a way to change or reteach behavior. Again, that's a separate adult behavior. This is documentation. However, some of your forms may include something like think sheets or processing sheets that engage the students in a dialogue about the behavior. That could be an opportunity to reteach a new behavior, but that's different from documenting the details of the event for data gathering purposes. Lastly, an ODR or an office discipline referral is not a reflection on any teacher's skill. If anything, it's a paper trail that can lead to strategies to support a teacher. So with regards to identifying those who, what, when, where, and whys of student behavior, let's make sure that the referral form gathers all the information that you need. Your ODR form should include the time of the incident, not when you're completing the form, but when the incident happened, the referring staff, not the primary teacher or the homeroom teacher. We also want to gather the perceived motivation. This is important in that it helps us to identify that why of the behavior. What did the student want when they acted out? And it helps us to plan for an appropriate response that meets the needs while being appropriate for school. When you first introduce the concept of motivation to your staff, there may be a lot of confusion about what each function looks like. There's a helpful document called Guidelines for Motivation that's available at PBISapps.org and can be distributed and reviewed with staff to help them to understand what adult attention-seeking behavior looks like versus task avoidance behavior. With the data gathered on your referral form for your Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 teams have sufficient information to create clear problem statements. These precision problem statements will help your teams to problem solve efficiently and create effective behavior support plans. Here are two examples of office discipline forms. They prompt for information such as the name, grade, date, motivation, etc. They also include sections regarding their due process and any actions taken by the office. You'll notice that there is very little writing involved. It's mostly checkboxes, and only critical information is there. And the checkboxes help to keep everything really concise and quick to fill out. So as you develop, revamp, or review your continuum of procedures to decrease behaviors, be sure to develop an office discipline referral form that gathers all the information that you need for problem solving, including the who, what, when, and where, and why. Also, develop clear procedures for addressing behaviors that are taught and reviewed with all the staff. Remember that sharing data with staff is one of the most powerful, important strategies you can use to get staff to implement your proactive and responsive strategies. So find ways to summarize your office discipline referral data for problem solving and show that data to your peers so that they get a sense of the trends in student behaviors. Also, track the frequency of your acknowledgements and compare that frequency to the frequency of office discipline referrals and other disciplinary actions. With such data, you can get a sense of whether you're reaching that 4-to-1, 5-to-1, 9-to-1 praise to critique ratio. Of course, you can use this data as a way to identify students who are in need of support and to track their response to interventions. With your team, your current with your team, review your current discipline referral system. If you don't have a form yet, look at our exemplars on anypbis.org or look at the example forms at PBIS apps. Using the tips and guidelines that we've provided here, make any adjustments needed to your current form. Make sure to gather feedback from your peers around the ease of use of your form. Try to make it as simple as possible while still gathering the essential WH question information. Once the form is ready, think about how you're going to train your staff on how and when to use the form. If you're not quite to the point where you're ready to work on your office discipline referral form, be sure to add this step to your action plan. Tripping over my words here. If you are using the SWIS system, School-Wide Information System, as your office discipline referral system, the referral is built in electronically and the data fields are finite. SWIS has already done the work of combining like categories and narrowing the choices. It does give users the option, however, of adding custom fields. They do have various paper versions that capture all the fields previously referenced. So thank you so much for spending time with us today to learn about building a continuum of responses for correcting undesirable behaviors. Next month, we'll be talking about database decision-making, as well as strategies to integrate and align PBIS with your other initiatives. Take care and thank you very much.